On the afternoon of June 26, 2006, the quiet, suburban community of Canning Vale, Western Australia, was rocked by a crime that would forever change the lives of its residents. 8-year-old Sofia Rodriguez Urrutia Shu, a bright and cheerful child with a passion for dance and art, was just beginning to enjoy the carefree days of her childhood. However, that afternoon her life was cruelly cut short in a brutal act that shocked not just her family, but an entire nation. The person responsible for this unspeakable crime was Dante Wyndham Arthurs, a man whose name would soon become synonymous with violence, deception, and the failure of systems meant to protect the vulnerable. Sofia's murder was not just a loss for her family but for a community that believed it was safe. It prompted an outpouring of grief and questions about the hidden dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of everyday life. What made the crime even more chilling was the seemingly ordinary nature of the situation. On that fateful day, Sofia had simply gone to a shopping center with her mother. A routine errand turned into a nightmare that no one could have predicted. The following story recounts the harrowing events of that day, the investigation that followed, and the lasting impact this tragedy had on those who were involved. Dante Wyndham Arthurs was born in 1984 in Perth, Western Australia. Growing up in a middle-class family, his early years were unremarkable. He was described by his peers and teachers as a shy and introverted child, someone who often kept to himself and struggled to form close relationships. His family life, though seemingly stable, hid underlying issues that would later contribute to his criminal behavior. While his parents were not abusive, there were tensions at home that were never fully addressed, and Arthurs never quite fit in with his peers. Throughout his teenage years, Arthurs exhibited troubling signs that were largely ignored by those around him. His interests veered toward dark, violent themes, and he became increasingly withdrawn. He was known to have a fascination with horror movies and violent video games, but these interests, while concerning, were dismissed as typical teenage behavior by most who knew him. Little did they know, these interests were the early warning signs of a far more sinister predilection. As he entered adulthood, Arthur's behavior became more erratic. He was known to have an unhealthy obsession with violence, regularly consuming disturbing online content that glorified aggression and sexual violence. Although these interests were alarming, they were not enough to raise suspicions that he might act on them. Yet, it was during this time that he was first questioned by the authorities. In 2003, he had been linked to the disappearance of another young girl, a case that had many parallels to Sofia's murder, but there was insufficient evidence to hold him. In hindsight, this earlier encounter should have been a red flag, but the justice system failed to intervene effectively. Dante Wyndham Arthurs continued to live among the public, slipping through the cracks of a system that was not designed to prevent the crimes that he was destined to commit. The afternoon of June 26, 2006, seemed like any other for Sofia and her family. Sofia, an energetic and friendly child, was out shopping with her mother at the Livingston Marketplace shopping center in Canning Vale. After completing some errands, her mother allowed Sofia to go to the restroom alone, a common occurrence that, in any other situation, would have been perfectly safe. But this time it was not. Unbeknownst to Sofia or her family, Dante Wyndham Arthurs was in the shopping center that day, and he was lurking nearby. Security cameras later revealed that he had been watching the area for some time, biding his time until he saw an opportunity. As Sofia entered the restroom, Arthurs followed her in, his actions calculated and deliberate. What happened next was nothing short of horrific. Arthurs attacked Sofia in a brutal and violent manner, sexually assaulting and murdering her in the confined space of the restroom. The crime was so senseless and savage that even seasoned investigators were shaken by the brutality of it. Forensic evidence, including DNA, would later confirm that Arthurs had been the sole perpetrator of the crime. He had taken Sofia's life in a manner that left the police and the public reeling, struggling to comprehend the depths of his depravity. After the attack, Arthurs fled the scene, attempting to blend into the crowd, as if nothing had happened. Sofia's mother, unaware of the horror unfolding just moments earlier, began to search for her daughter after noticing that she had been gone for longer than expected. The restroom was soon discovered to be the scene of the crime, and a frantic search for the perpetrator ensued. The police were called, and emergency responders arrived at the scene, but it was too late for Sofia. Despite their best efforts to save her, she was pronounced dead at the scene, her life extinguished by the hands of a predator. The police response to the murder of Sofia Rodriguez Urrutia Shu was swift and methodical. The first step was to secure the crime scene, and it didn't take long before investigators found a crucial piece of evidence: security footage showing a man, later identified as Dante Wyndham Arthurs, entering and exiting the restroom at the time of the murder. Witnesses also came forward to describe a suspicious man lingering near the restroom, and soon, a profile of the killer began to emerge. The authorities launched a full-scale investigation, pulling in resources from across Western Australia to track down the perpetrator. Forensic teams scoured the crime scene, collecting DNA evidence that would ultimately seal Arthur's fate. Arthurs was soon identified as the prime suspect, but he was nowhere to be found. As the investigation ramped up, detectives discovered that he had a history of troubling behavior. In fact, he had been a person of interest in another case from 3 years earlier, involving a similar assault on a young girl. However, the lack of conclusive evidence in that case meant that he had never been charged. Despite his attempts to avoid capture, Arthurs was apprehended by police just days after Sofia's murder. His arrest was a tense moment for investigators, who had already pieced together much of the crime, but still needed to question him. When interrogated, Arthurs remained eerily calm, giving little away in his responses. His demeanor, detached and emotionless, raised the hairs on the backs of detectives' necks, further confirming the nature of the man they were dealing with. Dante Wyndham Arthurs' trial was a highly publicized and emotional event. The prosecution presented a damning case, using the overwhelming forensic evidence to build a strong argument for his guilt. They highlighted the brutality of the crime, the victim's age, and the sheer senselessness of his actions. They painted a picture of a man who had been living among the public, hiding in plain sight, and capable of unimaginable violence. The defense, however, attempted to argue that Arthurs should not be held fully accountable for his actions due to alleged psychological issues. His defense team suggested that his obsession with violent fantasies and his history of troubling behavior indicated that he was not entirely in control of his actions. They called for a reduced sentence, citing a potential diagnosis of a personality disorder. For Sofia's family, the trial was an agonizing ordeal. They were forced to listen to the details of the crime that took their daughter's life. The court sessions were a constant reminder of their loss, but they pressed on, determined to see justice done for Sofia. The emotional toll was immense, but they found strength in knowing that their daughter's tragic death had led to changes in the laws surrounding the protection of children. In the end, Dante Wyndham Arthurs pleaded guilty to the charges of murder and sexual assault. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 13 years, sparking debates over the adequacy of his sentence. Many felt that the severity of the crime warranted a harsher punishment. The murder of Sofia Rodriguez Urrutia Shu was not just a loss for her family, but for the entire country. It ignited a nationwide conversation about the safety of children and the failings of systems that were supposed to protect them. In the aftermath, many people rallied to demand stronger laws to prevent similar tragedies. Sofia's parents, devastated but determined, established the Sofia Foundation in her memory. The foundation's mission was to promote child safety and raise awareness about the warning signs of abuse and violence. Through their tireless advocacy, they worked to ensure that their daughter's death would not be in vain, pushing for changes in the legal system and greater support for mental health services. The case also highlighted the need for improved background checks on individuals with a history of troubling behavior. Many argued that if the authorities had intervened sooner in Arthur's case, Sofia's death might have been prevented. The case led to a nationwide push for reforms in how authorities handle suspects with violent tendencies. The national conversation sparked by Sofia's murder did not end with the conclusion of the trial. In fact, it grew into a widespread movement advocating for the protection of children and stricter penalties for sex offenders. Families, advocacy groups, and lawmakers alike rallied around the need for systemic changes. Public outrage over the leniency of Dante Wyndham Arthurs' sentencing fueled demands for a reassessment of how Australia's justice system handles child protection cases. The call for reform became especially poignant after it was revealed that Arthurs had been previously investigated for his involvement in a similar case but had slipped through the cracks. The fact that he had been able to continue living freely among the public despite having a history of disturbing behavior raised serious questions about how law enforcement and the legal system handle individuals with violent tendencies. In the wake of the case, there were efforts to make child safety a top priority for politicians and law enforcement officials. New initiatives were put forward to strengthen background checks for individuals working with children and better systems for monitoring offenders after they had served their sentences. A concerted effort was made to pass laws that would make it more difficult for convicted sex offenders to evade justice and reoffend. At the same time, the case led to renewed debates about the mental health of violent offenders. Should individuals like Arthur's, who clearly demonstrated a history of troubling behavior and mental health issues, be given lighter sentences, or should the focus be on ensuring that they can never harm anyone again? These questions became central to discussions about how society should deal with violent criminals and whether early intervention in cases of mental illness could prevent future tragedies. Despite the advancements in policy that followed, many felt that no law or reform could undo the damage done by Arthur's actions. For Sophia's family, the fight for justice was both a means of ensuring their daughter's memory lived on and a way to make sure no other family would have to experience the horror they had endured. While the public conversation shifted toward reforms, the emotional aftermath for Sophia's family remained their own personal battle. The murder of a child is a tragedy that leaves a hole that can never truly be filled. In the months following Sophia's death, her parents struggled with grief and heartbreak, the magnitude of their loss sometimes too much to bear. Every milestone that Sophia would have reached, her first day of school, her graduation, her wedding day, was now forever out of reach. However, Sophia's parents refused to let their daughter's death be forgotten. They worked relentlessly to ensure that the memory of their precious girl lived on, even if she could no longer do so. In addition to creating the Sophia Foundation, they spoke out in public forums, participated in rallies, and lobbied for stricter child protection laws. Their grief, though overwhelming, fueled a determination to make a difference. In an interview years after the case, Sophia's mother spoke tearfully about the journey of loss and healing. "We will never be the same," she said. "But if we can save even one other child from the pain that Sophia suffered, then perhaps her life, her short life, will have had a purpose." Through their advocacy, Sophia's family was able to bring attention to the importance of early intervention and prevention. They found solace in the belief that their daughter's death had sparked real change, even though it could never bring her back. The legacy of Sofia Rodriguez Urrutia Shu continues to be felt today. Her story, one of unimaginable loss and senseless violence, has shaped the way Australia views child protection. The Sophia Foundation, established by her family, continues to work tirelessly to promote child safety and create awareness around the risks of child abuse and exploitation. Through their efforts, the Foundation has worked on a variety of initiatives aimed at ensuring the safety and well-being of children across the country. Their work includes raising awareness about the warning signs of sexual abuse, advocating for stronger laws to protect children, and supporting survivors of violence. They also work with schools, local governments, and other organizations to promote safety in communities, ensuring that tragedies like Sophia's murder are prevented in the future. Sophia's legacy lives on in the hearts of those who knew her, and in the lives of children who will never have to experience the horrors she did, thanks to the reforms inspired by her tragic death. Though Sophia's life was brief, her impact continues to resonate. It serves as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the fight for justice and the protection of the innocent can spark change.